This is the Spirit and Wellness Show. News and information from a higher perspective. With your host, Harry Wilkinson. Yes, hello, and welcome to the Spirit and Wellness Show. My name is Harry Wilkinson, and this is the show where we take a look at the days and weeks events, happenings in the world of politics, happenings in the international arena, happenings in the media, entertainment, technology, science, all of those things. And we take a look at it from a higher perspective. And from a higher perspective, I'm talking about a spiritual or a metaphysical perspective, essentially. So what does that mean? Well, that means that quite often, throughout our week, we are bombarded with news stories and information in our overly abundant information technology world that we live in, and particularly as it pertains to the news media, quite often these stories are targeted. They are meant to elicit certain responses. At the very least, they're meant to push enough buttons to get your attention. Because the news media needs to have your attention so that they can get ratings, so that they can make money. And that's what it's all about. Unfortunately, the fallout of some of that is being hit with stories that make you feel like the world is falling apart. And at the very least, put some very stressful thoughts in your mind and can interfere with your peace of mind. So basically, the idea of, looking at these things from a higher perspective is to get your peace of mind back. And we do that by looking at these stories and realizing that, number one, although they appear to be so very important, they're actually not that important at all. They are stories we are creating on a higher level. That's where the metaphysics comes in, the idea that we exist beyond our physical bodies as oneness. And that in this oneness we are creators. Some use the term co-creators with the universe, or co-creators with God, however you like to frame that. And that we create these scenarios. We create these stories, this world that we interact with, and have our time on stage with. We create them as I use the metaphor of a hologram, or a video game, or a virtual reality game, more like it, in which you are immersed in a situation, or many situations, that appear to be very real. And these situations that appear to be very real get your energy going, they get your emotions flowing, they get you involved, and you interact with them as I would use the term avatar, this physical representation of yourself, which is not who you really are, but a reflection of that. And we experience these things. And why do we experience them? Well, because at the highest level that we exist, we don't get to experience those things, because we wouldn't. Because at that level, we are everything. We are powerful beyond measure. We are creators of amazing power. So little angst-inducing situations like, the economy, or, the international scene, which we'll get to today, because there's obviously an awful lot to talk about in that area. These things are of little or no consequence and really are just mere reflections and have little to do with the truth, with the capital T truth of who and what we really are. But instead, we get to play the game. We get to interact. We get to feel powerless or feel that there's limitations that we have and work through those limitations. And it's a thrilling ride, sometimes a little, maybe a little too thrilling for some, but it's a thrilling ride, much like a roller coaster. But at the end of the day, it is just a ride. None of it is real, and the truth of who and what we are remains. So that's the idea and of what I do here on this show. And I started doing it years ago for my own sense of peace of mind, to help me remember those things and to focus on those things and to look at things that way. And I felt like doing a show was a great way to remind me, and if others felt that way too in listening, happy to bring them along. So that's kind of what I do. And as I said, it's important to remind yourself it's just a ride. There's a famous comedian. He unfortunately passed away very young in the mid-90s. And that was actually the title of, I think, certainly was one of his comedic bits, one of his stand-up bits. And later on became the title of the documentary that they did about him. He, if you get a chance to listen to him, he, in his own way, as a stand-up comedian, says exactly the same thing I just said. His name was Bill Hicks. And, wow. Oh, great. Here it is. Thank you. This is exactly what he said. And it's worth remembering as we enter this 2016 year that has been such a roller coaster ride. So It's Just a Ride by Mr. Bill Hicks. The world is like a ride at an amusement park, and when you choose to go on it, you think it's real because that's how powerful our minds are. And the ride goes up and down and around, and it has thrills and chills, and it's very brightly colored, and it's very loud. And it's fun for a while. Some people have been on the ride for a long time, and they begin to question, is this real? Or is this just a ride? And other people have remembered, and they come back to us and they say, hey, don't worry, don't be afraid ever, because this is just a ride. And we kill those people. Shut him up. We have a lot invested in this ride. Shut him up. Look at my furrows of worry. Look at my big bank account and my family. This has to be real. It's just a ride. But we always kill those good guys who try and tell us that. Ever notice that? And we let the demons run amok. But it doesn't matter because it's just a ride. And we can change it at any time we want. It's only a choice, no effort, no worry, no job, no savings and money, just a choice right now between fear and love. The eyes of fear want you to put bigger locks on your door, buy bigger guns, close yourself off. The eyes of love, instead, see all of us as one. Here's what we can do to change the world right now into a better ride. Take all that money we spend on weapons and defense each year and instead spend it feeding, clothing, and educating the poor of the world, which it would do many times over, not one human being excluded. And we can explore space together, both inner and outer, forever in peace. And that's what Bill Hicks, a comedian, used as his quote. stand-up routine to end his stand-up. Isn't it amazing? It's just amazing. I'm so glad I found this. I've got to keep this now. Anyway, that's what it's about, folks. And that's what this show is about. So, the title of this show might be a little confusing to some. If you've never seen this show, never heard this show before, or if you've listened, before, uh, it's not a usual title. But I want to talk about 2016 this year because it's been a topsy-turvy, crazy year for a lot of people. An upside-down year where things that people just didn't expect would ever happen happened. Just as a couple of examples, certainly the rise of Donald Trump as a presidential candidate. Just a mere 6 months ago, nobody thought that was going to happen. Same thing with the what they call the Brexit, with Britain voting to leave the European Union, which is, people are making a real big deal about. That was not expected either. And these things have turned a lot of people's worlds upside down. So I want to talk about that in relation to Heyoka. Heyoka. Heyoka is a term the Lakota people, Native American people who lived in the Great Plains and still do. It's a type of medicine, and it's a type of approach that their medicine people used. It is pretty much, it's related to, and this translation isn't exactly correct, but it's the sacred clown. And Heyoka people are people who turn everything they do, everyday ceremonies and the lives of the people in their tribe, they turn them upside down. They turn them on their head, and for a very sacred reason, which we'll talk about later. So that's what Heyoka means. And how does that relate to the transition era that I talk about on this show every week? The transition era being this time we're living in now, when we are going through deep, deep changes in every aspect of our lives, from the economy to technology to our healthcare to our education system, everything. But most importantly, the reason we're going through all of these transitions is because we are changing or transitioning the way that we think about the world. And science is expanding in a way that just a few short years ago people would have laughed at. Quantum theory, the idea of the God particle, dark matter, all of these things were considered to be vague theories at best, and now they are established facts. And these established facts show us just exactly how the universe is created by what we put attention to. The universe is made up of wave particles that respond to thoughts and the energy of others, just to bottom line it. And we talk about this all the time on the show. Certainly we'll have another show where we get more into that kind of stuff. But I want to just focus on what we're going to talk about today. But the transition era is this era where we are in, where these changes are happening, and some of them are happening fast. We've seen things that have been resisted for decades, literally, or almost literally, change overnight. Things like gay marriage. Things like, the other example I always like to use is the Confederate flag, which for years, if anybody even suggested that you shouldn't be flying that on a public building or waving it in my face because I find it offensive, you were told that you were infringing on someone else's rights. Well, that situation drastically changed when a gentleman who was flying all kinds of Confederate flags on his pickup truck drove to a church, and this was happened a year ago, and a church that was African American, and killed 11 people, just shot them down. And this so horrified people that they began to debate this Confederate flag symbolism. And lo and behold, Confederate flags are now not allowed to be flown on federal public buildings. And many companies, big companies such as Target and Walmart, won't sell them. And that's a situation that people have wanted. So really, the reemergence of that flag came at the same time as the civil rights movement, as a symbol for those who opposed that. And now it's gone away. So, but that's an example of the transition era that we're in. Unfortunately, most of the transitions that we're seeing are not going to happen that easily. Not that those happened easily; they took decades, right? But what we're seeing is steps forward and pull back, step forward and pull back, and that's how this change happens. And it's happening that way as a way, I believe, of refinement, of making sure these changes last and aren't upended. And but again, it also is coming down to this choice of fear and love. And those choices, that going back and forth between love and fear is becoming faster and heating up. And so every time we're faced with that choice. And we get faced with the choice over and over again, until we are able to choose love. So, and that's where the Heyoka comes in, and I'm going to talk about that right now. And I didn't even think about it. You know what? I didn't even plan to read that Bill Hicks quote that I read to you at the top of the show. But what a perfect person to start off a discussion of Heyoka medicine with. A comedian who turns things around and gets you to see truth. That's what Bill Hicks was. That's what Heyoka does. So, Heyoka is a kind of medicine that, as I said, it's a sacred clown, but it's more than that. It's a contrarian, a jester, someone who speaks and moves and reacts in the opposite fashion to the people around them. Black Elk, very famous Lakota medicine man, considered himself to be Heyoka, and there's a whole cosmology around that regarding thunder beings, and shamans and medicine men have visions. They go on vision quests at an early age, and only those that see the thunder beings of the West and are recognized as such by the community take on that role of Heyoka, and it's a sacred role. It's the role of being backwards, forwards, upside down, or contrary in nature by doing things backwards or unconventionally. For instance, in tribal world, they might ride a horse backwards, wear their clothes inside out, speak in a backward tongue. For instance, there's a for instance here. I'm looking at an article that's popping up on Wikipedia here. And they give an example of if food is scarce, a Heyoka may sit around and complain about how full he is. Or during a baking hot heat wave, the Heyoka might shiver with cold and put on gloves and cover himself with a thick blanket. Um, and this is Heyoka symbolizes ways of aspects of what they call the sacred beings or the wakan. And what it does is to, by ending these things or turning these things around, it gets people to look at things in a different way. They ask difficult questions and they say things that others are too afraid to say. Their behavior poses questions, and their behavior might be rude or uncomfortable. Does that sound like anybody we know? Does that sound like any presidential candidate that we know? Yep, that's where I'm going with this. I'll get back to it. But let me continue here. Heyoka is a mirror and a teacher. Heyoka uses extreme behaviors to mirror others and force them to examine their own beliefs, doubts, fears, hatreds, and weaknesses. Got it? Heyoka have the power to heal emotional pain from the experience of shame. They sing of shameful events in their lives, beg for food, and live as clowns. They provoke laughter in distressing situations of despair and provoke fear and chaos when people feel complacent and overly secure to keep them from taking themselves too seriously or believing that they are more powerful than they are. In addition, sacred clowns serve an important role in shaping tribal codes. Unbound by societal constraints, Heyoka are able to violate cultural taboos freely and thus critique established customs. Paradoxically, however, by violating these norms and taboos, they help to define the accepted boundaries, rules, and societal guidelines for ethical and moral behavior. They are the only ones who can ask why about sensitive topics. You get me? So here's what I'm saying. I'm saying that the whole Donald Trump experience is Heyoka. He is Heyoka. I don't think he knows it. He certainly isn't consciously doing it, but his behavior is Heyoka. Because I believe what he's doing is turning a mirror on the Republican Party, but not just the Republican Party, on politics in general, getting them to look at, particularly in the Republican Party, their fears. You know, how far are you willing to go with your anti-immigration stance? How far are you willing to go with some of these, ideas that you have? It gets them to re-examine those things, and through shame and distressing situations and the chaos it engenders, it upends their complacency and keeps them from taking themselves too seriously. And I tell you what, if there's anything that's needed, it's something that will help Republicans stop taking themselves so seriously. I'm sorry. I don't usually get very, very political on this show. I do talk about it from time to time, and I'm not, unwilling to share my political beliefs. But political beliefs are part of the illusion, or part of the the game that we play. So I engage with the game, but I also am aware that there's a lot more going on than that. But let me not digress here. I like the part, where paradoxically, by violating the norms and taboos, they help to define the accepted boundaries. So when we see this extreme behavior and these extreme statements come out of Donald Trump, that essentially will ultimately result in us redefining and realizing why we have these rules, why we don't say silly things like that, and so on and so forth. So that is Heyoka. And Black Elk is perhaps the most famous Heyoka shaman that ever lived. And what he said was, in Heyoka ceremony, everything is backwards, and it is planned that the people shall be made to feel jolly and happy first, so that it may be easier for the power to come to them. You have noticed that the truth comes into this world with two faces. One is sad with suffering, and the other laughs, but it's the same face, laughing or weeping. When people are already in despair, maybe the laughing face is better for them. And when they feel too good and are too sure of being safe, maybe the weeping face is better for them to see. And so I think that is what the Heyoka ceremony is for. Another Native American, the name of Laughing Deer, writes, a Lakota way of being, a medicine way. That's Heyoka. A Heyoka is one who does things backwards or opposite. The idea that Heyoka is a clown comes from the opposite behavior. It is part of the medicine of Heyoka to remind us we are merely human beings, and not to become too serious about ourselves, not to imagine we are more powerful than we really are, reminding us that spirit holds all the power. In this day, there are those among the Lakota who pour Heyoka lodges, which are directed towards the west and full of laughter. If a Heyoka man messes up, he has the Thunder Nation to deal with. Spirit chooses who is Heyoka. It is a very difficult path to follow. So, certainly, Donald Trump has set the entire Republican Party on its ear. Certainly, they are re-examining what they believe and who they are. And certainly, it's upended them and made them realize that they're not as powerful as they thought they were. Because, as I said, nobody thought he would be their nominee. And I think he does serve as a reminder. Like him or hate him. And if you're spending your time hating him, you need to think about that. And why that is. You may not like his policies, and you probably shouldn't. But if you're hating him, think about that. What buttons are those things pushing, and what does that help you to examine? But if he's done anything, it's certainly, some people say he's made a circus out of it. But the other side of that is it's helping us to not take ourselves and our politics and our laws so seriously. And that's a gift. That's something, that spirit gives us, even though we may not see it that way. Here's what I think. When Donald Trump started out to run for president, I don't think he thought he had a chance either. And I don't think there's anybody on the planet, in this world, who is more surprised that he's the nominee than Donald Trump is. I don't think he expected it. Not sure that he even understands what to do with it, but he's been sort of thrust into this role, and I think it does come from something, on a higher plane. Well, clearly we've created him, and I believe we've created him to be Heyoka. We've put him in this position to shake things up. So perhaps that means for the Republican Party and politics in general that we will re-examine how we talk to each other, how we debate things, how we think about things. So briefly, because I didn't get to spend a lot of time on the Brexit situation, but that's another situation that's come out unexpectedly and has people concerned and worried a bit. I think it's kind of too soon to really get a grasp on what that means. But the people of Britain voted against being part of the European Union, being part of the group, and they want to go it alone. And in some ways, it is a rather silly gesture because at the end of the day, they still have to work with these countries. They still have to have agreements with these countries. They're still going to work together. But they can say that, we are sovereign and therefore we don't play by your rules and so forth and so on. And, it's a basic kind of almost childish sort of tantrum, I think. You can't tell me what to do. And my guess is, my feeling, it's not a guess, it's a feeling, an intuition, that this is fear-based. This again, when we are faced again with that choice of love or fear, sometimes fear gets chosen, and this time I think fear got chosen. So fear is what is behind all separation, right? We know that. And love is what brings us back into oneness. So, there's going to be complications. There's going to be changes. As I said, this refining process of forward and back, push and pull, the continued having to choose between fear and love, is part of the transition era. But the choice will be presented again in one way or another. And this time, perhaps, love will be what's chosen instead of fear. There's no way to tell, but usually when fear gets chosen like this, it just means that people aren't ready. They haven't had the experiences they need to experience. They haven't evolved enough in consciousness to choose love the way they really want to. And so, more lessons need to be learned. And I think that's what, or at least from a metaphysical standpoint, that's what this Brexit is all about. That's what Brexit is telling us about. So, fear and love. You know what? I think I ought to start every show out with that quote by Bill Hicks. What do you think? I just think it's totally encapsulates what I'm trying to do. Well, I will at least read it again some other time. But remember, it's just a ride. Have a good week.